Well, is Nic Cage set to take up the role of Spider-Man Noir? Well, it appears all the Spider-Man Amazon series that are in the works, including Silk, are getting some major overhauls and big news, and we've got both the reports to break down. Let's take a couple minutes to talk about Spider-Man Noir, Nic Cage taking up the role, and a massive overhaul to Silk Spider Society. Now, before we do that, though, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button and ring that bell for all the updates. We do daily Marvel and DC videos, and we want to be your place for all the superhero news, but we're going to bring it to you truthfully and transparently, so you are in the know. Well, a little more than a year ago, we started to get a lot of news from Sony Pictures, and there are plans to start developing live-action Spider-Man series over on Amazon. This was clearly a response to some of Marvel Studios' success expanding the MCU on Disney+, and the first two projects we started to get some news on were Spider-Man Noir and Silk. Now, we've got a really big update surrounding both projects, and this comes from The Ankler. Now, The Ankler is what I would kind of call an up-and-coming trade, but they have had some pretty solid reports in recent months, and although they're not Variety or Deadline, they're fastly approaching it, and I think they actually do have some journalistic credibility behind their reports. Now, there are two reports, one of them surrounding Nic Cage returning as Spider-Man Noir, and the other one surrounding Silk. So let's kick off the story with talking a little bit about Silk. Over the weekend, it was pretty clear that Madam Web has pretty much crashed and burned at the box office. You can draw your own conclusions on what you think of the movie, but it appears the impact of that project has definitely changed some of Sony's plans for Silk Spider Society. Now, according to The Ankler, the upcoming TV series has fired their entire writing room, leaving only Angela Kang, who worked on The Walking Dead, as the showrunner and one unnamed co-executive producer, probably either Lord or Miller. If you remember correctly, a couple weeks ago, the WGA actually threatened Amazon with legal action after the show's writers were locked into contracts, but they really didn't put them to work. This made it pretty clear there was some behind-the-scenes changes happening, and it appears they were probably waiting to see how Madam Web was received before moving forward. Now, this is where the report gets, in some people's minds, a little controversial. Because the site explains, and I quote, one source close to the series claimed that Silk was being refocused with a more male-skewed audience in mind. Sources had previously told me that the Silk writers' room had been a number of episodes deep into the season before the strike began. This is obviously a pretty interesting take, and given how poorly both the Marvels and Madam Web did at theaters, well, it could be a response to that. I actually think there's plenty of room in the superhero landscape for both male and female-skewed audiences. And quite honestly, this kind of response I really don't know what to make of, but I do think these shows can easily be developed to kind of appeal to the mass audience. This is kind of really hard to figure out, but I have to imagine this full-size creative shakeup goes way beyond who the show's target audience is. I really do think overall Sony is going back to the drawing board for all their live-action offerings, and possibly niching down into a deeper demographic could be something they're going to avoid and try to appeal more to general audiences. Silk is a pretty popular character. She's been around since Amazing Spider-Man Volume 3 number 1 in 2014, and honestly is a character that's way overdue and one of the coolest versions of Spider characters that's come out of the comics in recent years. Hopefully they get this one back on track. I am pretty curious on what they're doing over on Amazon, and this show has the potential to be a huge hit. Now, the second big story is surrounding Spider-Man Noir. And then according to The Ankler, the show is now moving forward, and they are saying that Nic Cage, who voiced the character in Into the Spider-Verse, is currently in serious talks to return as a live-action version of the character. Now, this has been something people have been speculating about since the day the show was, and for me, has always been something that needed to happen in order to really get this show to work. Now, the series currently doesn't have a title, but we're assuming they're going to call it Spider-Man Noir, and we do know it'll follow an older, grizzled superhero in the 1930s New York City, and will be set in its own universe, with the main character not being Peter Parker. Now, in the comics, Spider-Man Noir is technically an alternate version of Peter, but it appears they're going to go in a different direction, and honestly, it'll probably work. Now, as far as a grizzled old superhero, well, Nic Cage kind of fits that bill nicely. It might not be apparent to every person, but Nic Cage is 60 years old, so him taking up the role of a grizzled old retired hero who worked the streets of New York in the early 19th century would be near perfect. It would also draw a lot of attention to the project and set it up for success. This might be what Sony's trying to do in the face of recent failures. The success of the Spider-Verse franchise cannot be denied. It's been one of their big wins, and that first movie connected with fans in all kinds of ways, so bringing Cage back as Spider-Man Noir is an absolute no-brainer. Now, obviously, both of these projects are in very, very early stages of development, and all kinds of things can happen. Both characters are pretty wicked cool and would make great series assuming they're developed correctly. Honestly, I think with Silk, the project was moving forward so slowly, to me, basically didn't have any momentum, and therefore the sort of purging of the writer's room, I wouldn't read too much into that. I don't think this is about demographics. I actually think it's about energy and building for success. And if the show wasn't moving forward at any kind of pace, whether it was the strike or the creative process, it was probably a good move. Spider-Man Noir is going to be a hit for them with Nic Cage standing in front of it. It should make for some interesting stories and could give a very unique version of Spider-Man to new audiences with a lot of creative freedom that Amazon gives, allowing it to be darker, edgier, and maybe even closer to TVMA, which I think fits Spider-Man Noir very well. Obviously, we're going to follow both of these stories really closely, bring you all the Spider-Verse news as soon as it happens, so smash that like and subscribe button so you don't miss any of the updates.